The Coleco Chameleon looked like a brand new cartridge console, but fans discovered that its prototypes were hiding two very old pieces of hardware. The first appeared to contain the motherboard from a redesigned Super Nintendo, commonly called the SNES Jr. That was suspicious, but potentially explainable as an early development shortcut. Then came the image that destroyed the project. Inside the Jaguar-shaped shell, investigators identified a standard PC video capture card, a device that could not possibly serve as the heart of the console being promised. That is how a fake prototype killed the Chameleon. If you want to see more retro hardware mysteries unravel, subscribe to Cartridge Graveyard. But the strangest part is that the deception did not begin with an obviously bad idea. It began with a pitch that thousands of retro players genuinely wanted to believe, and the final collapse would come down to the simplest request imaginable: open the box. To understand why anyone cared so much about what was inside that plastic shell, go back to 2015. Modern gaming had become incredibly convenient, but also strangely temporary. A game could disappear from a digital store, lose its servers, or demand a patch larger than the original release. Players were no longer always buying a finished object, 03, and hoping the hard drive survived. So the Retro VGS pitch hit a nerve. Retro VGS stood for Retro Video Game System. The project was led by Mike Kennedy, publisher of Retro Magazine and someone who clearly understood the emotional power of physical games. His proposed console would use cartridges containing complete, ready-to-play software. Insert the game, switch on the machine, and start playing without waiting for an installation bar to crawl across the screen. Kennedy also had something no other retro console startup could easily copy: the original injection molds used for the Atari Jaguar's console shell and cartridge casing. That meant Retro VGS could place new hardware inside authentic 1990s plastic. Yes, the Jaguar shell was coming back. Because if you are going to resurrect cartridge gaming, why not do it inside the body of Atari's most wonderfully chaotic console? What could possibly go wrong? Quite a lot, as it turned out. $95 million. Early systems cost around $300, so nostalgia alone was not enough. At that price, buyers wanted to know exactly what lived beneath the Jaguar-shaped hood. Would the machine use an ARM processor or an FPGA, a programmable chip capable of recreating older hardware behavior? Which games were actually confirmed? How powerful would it be? Most importantly, why did the specifications and prices seem to change whenever potential buyers looked closely? Those questions mattered because Kennedy was not offering a simple clone console. He was asking the public to finance an entire hardware platform. But the more money the project requested, the less defined the machine seemed to become. The Indiegogo campaign raised only a small fraction of its goal and was withdrawn. That should have ended the story, but the central idea still had power. A new cartridge console remained irresistible to a certain kind of player, so the team searched for something that could convert that enthusiasm into credibility. They found one of the strongest names in early console history: Coleco. For players of a certain age, that name still carries weight. The ColecoVision launched in 1982 and built its reputation on arcade-style conversions that looked startlingly good for the time. Donkey Kong came packed with the system, while games such as Zaxxon, Venture, and Ladybug made the machine feel like an arcade cabinet had quietly moved into the living room. But the company behind the original ColecoVision had left the video game business decades earlier. The surviving Coleco name was a licensed brand, so this was not the original engineering team returning from the dead with soldering irons held high. It was a licensing partnership. Even so, branding changes perception. Retro VGS sounded like a risky crowdfunding proposal. Coleco Chameleon sounded like a real console. The Jaguar-shaped shell received a colorful Coleco badge. A Kickstarter launch was scheduled for February 2016, and suddenly the comeback appeared possible. That is the strange power of an old name. It does not merely remind us of a product. It borrows trust from childhood. But borrowed trust creates a debt. Eventually, someone will ask to see the machine. A prototype appeared, and retro hardware communities began studying the photographs with extraordinary precision. These are people who can identify a circuit board from 3 blurry capacitors and the spiritual aura of a video connector. You do not fool them with electrical tape and positive thinking. Fans compared component layouts, connector positions, and visible sections of the board with known systems. The pattern led them to a redesigned Super Nintendo released in the late 1990s. The compact SNES 101 model, better known as the SNES Jr. That discovery explained why the prototype could run Super Nintendo software, but it did not demonstrate that the Chameleon's promised architecture existed. It demonstrated that someone could fit a Super Nintendo inside an Atari Jaguar shell. Now that alone did not have to be fatal. 8S. Hardware projects often begin with donor consoles, development boards, exposed wires, and cases held together by whatever happens to be nearby. Early prototypes are supposed to be ugly. They exist to test controls, display output, cartridge dimensions, or even the basic shape of an idea. But there is a crucial difference between saying, "This Super Nintendo board is temporarily helping us test the shell," and presenting that shell as evidence of your new console. A rough prototype can build confidence if the compromises are explained honestly. A mysterious prototype does the opposite. Because every hidden detail becomes a question, the team nevertheless pushed forward toward the American International Toy Fair in New York. This was supposed to be the Chameleon's recovery. A functioning system at a major industry event could silence critics before Kickstarter. Publishers could see it, journalists could photograph it, and potential buyers could finally watch games running on real hardware. Instead, Toy Fair made the questions louder. The display unit appeared to work, but visitors could not inspect its internals. Parts of the rear were obscured, cables disappeared behind the system, and the shell remained closed. That meant the demonstration provided movement on a screen without revealing what was actually producing it. Pause for a second and imagine the pressure inside that booth. The team had revived the Coleco name. The Kickstarter clock was ticking. Thousands of retro fans wanted the project to succeed. But those same fans were freezing video frames, enlarging photographs, comparing port placement, and searching databases of old computer hardware. Nostalgia may be emotional, but circuit boards leave fingerprints. After the SNES Jr discovery, the project desperately needed transparent evidence of original hardware. 8S. The team later shared photographs intended to show prototype electronics inside the shell. This should have ended the speculation. Instead, it produced the most damaging discovery of all. The visible board was identified as a HICAP50B PC video capture card. Its component arrangement and connectors matched publicly available images of the card. This was hardware designed to bring video into a computer, not hardware designed to become a standalone cartridge console. The board could fill space inside the plastic shell and create the visual density of real internal electronics. But it could not perform the role viewers were being encouraged to imagine. That detail transformed the story. The SNES Jr could at least run a game, so it might have been defended as a crude proof of concept. The capture card was different. It appeared in imagery offered to reassure people after the first prototype had already been challenged. In other words, the attempt to prove the console was real became the strongest evidence that it was not. The original Retro VGS could survive an unsuccessful Indiegogo campaign. It could survive a $300 price, shifting specifications, and an embarrassing donor motherboard. Hardware development is messy. Delays happen and designs change. But trust follows different rules. Once fans suspected that unrelated components were being placed inside shells to create the appearance of progress, every previous explanation became unstable. The question was no longer whether the Chameleon would launch on time. It was whether a Chameleon architecture existed at all. Coleco Holdings now had its name attached to the machine, so online criticism threatened more than a crowdfunding campaign. The company demanded that an independent engineer inspect the prototype. There it was, the request that would decide everything. Open the box. Show us what it is. An honest development unit did not need to be elegant. It could have been a bare circuit board surrounded by loose cables, handwritten labels, and half-finished firmware. If it demonstrated that the promised technology existed, the project might still have survived. But no convincing machine emerged for inspection. In March 2016, Coleco Holdings terminated its relationship with the Chameleon project. The license name disappeared, the Kickstarter campaign collapsed before it could properly begin, and the console died without shipping a single retail unit. But here is the deeper twist. The famous Coleco badge did not save the project. It accelerated its destruction. The name attracted more believers, so it created greater scrutiny. Toy Fair provided visibility, so it gave investigators better photographs. Each attempt to manufacture credibility produced more evidence to examine, and each piece of evidence widened the gap between the promise and the hardware. The very things meant to rescue the console became the tools that exposed it. That is why this story is more than a funny tale about a capture card shoved into retro plastic. The Chameleon had a genuinely attractive idea. New games on physical cartridges still held emotional value, and even the recycled Jaguar shell had a weird charm. It is easy to imagine sliding a new cartridge into that ridiculous curved machine and hearing it click into position. The tragedy was that the audience did not demand perfection. Retro players would probably have forgiven an expensive, underpowered, unfinished prototype if the team had shown it honestly. Instead, the project tried to use the appearance of progress as a substitute for progress itself. And the community noticed because nostalgia did not make those players gullible. It made them observant. They remembered the weight of cartridges, the position of ports, and the look of the boards they had lived with for decades. They had spent years blowing dust from contacts, even though, yes, we now know we probably should not have done that. The final revelation was never just that one shell contained the wrong board. It was that the entire campaign depended on authenticity, while its physical evidence repeatedly undermined that feeling. A console promising certainty in an increasingly digital world became one of the most uncertain hardware projects of its era. The Coleco Chameleon sold 0 retail units, but its warning remains. People can forgive an unfinished machine far more easily than a finished illusion. It was built to make gaming feel physical again, yet in the end, the one thing nobody could hold was the console itself. Would you have backed the Chameleon if the team had opened the shell and shown an honest working prototype? Tell me in the comments, and if you enjoy exploring the glorious, messy history of retro gaming, like the video and subscribe. You'll be glad you did.